First, the truth versus the story. Our perception is a big part of this. So, we have our perception kind of at these two levels. We have our lived experience, and then we have that social proof. So, I invite you to recall that our brain is wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So, any past experience or even a story about an experience can create resistance as our brain tries to protect us in the future. Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol free living. I'm your host, Terry Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion. Learn the truth behind the alcohol myths and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge. You're listening to episode 152 of the Sober Edge podcast. Well, hey everyone, it's Terry back with another edition of the Sober Edge podcast, and we're going to dive into myths about alcohol. This is a topic that you've probably thought about before if you are on your own sober, curious journey, or perhaps you are just poking a few holes into those myths and beliefs that you hold about alcohol. So, right off the top, I want to kind of set this up that I am going to use the term myth or belief sort of interchangeably. And the true definition is that a belief is something that you believe regardless of the evidence or because of the evidence. And a myth is something that is accepted more as a falsity or legend, but it's probably more accurate to say that we're going to talk about the beliefs that you hold around alcohol that maybe are not true. So, what's really fascinating is that we have this entire belief system that is related to alcohol, such as whether it's good for you or harmful, whether drinking is bad, whether drinking is fun, whether drinking booze tastes good, whether it tastes bad. I like certain kinds of alcohol, but not others. Somebody drinks this much or crosses the line. This is my thought about that. How I feel about drinking and driving. Some people have travelers in their car. So, as long as they're not drunk, they feel like having a drink in their car inside a sippy cup is fine. So, there are a lot of thoughts that each person has and holds around alcohol. And the reason is because it's so prevalent in our culture and our society. We just can't avoid conversations about alcohol, witnessing people drinking, seeing alcohol being served or sold almost everywhere. And so, of course, something that is that prevalent is just going to start to seep into our conscious and subconscious. So today, I want to invite us to explore some of those subconscious beliefs that if we bring them into our conscious thought, if we bring some awareness, we might find out that they're not actually true. And why would this be helpful? Because it's important when we're exploring our relationship or redefining our relationship with alcohol that we call the facts so that we are not misleading ourselves when it comes to the impact that alcohol has on our health or the benefits, supposed benefits of having the occasional drink. And again, we are fed a lot of misinformation intentionally by big alcohol and maybe unintentionally by some of our cultural messaging around alcohol, such as drink responsibly, everything in moderation. 12-step programs have given us some beliefs around alcohol that may or may not serve you or be true for you or true for anyone, such as, if you go out, it's going to be much scarier. If you start drinking again, it's going to go down fast. It's going to be bad. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. So, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about where these beliefs come from, how to question these beliefs, and what these beliefs are really telling us about our relationship with alcohol. All right, so if you're ready to dive in, here we go. So, first, I want to talk about kind of these three layers or levels of belief. And this comes from my training as a This Naked Mind Institute coach. So, the level of substance, the level of society, and the level of self. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that these three levels of belief are not just around alcohol. They're really to help us understand our connection to any belief that we have. So let's start in this case with substance. So, alcohol as a substance. You may have beliefs, and chances are you do, around alcohol as a substance. So, you may believe that alcohol as a substance is harmless. You may believe that alcohol as a substance is toxic. You may believe that alcohol as a substance, it helps you relax, that the chemical properties of alcohol help you relax. You may believe that alcohol is good for your heart. So these are some beliefs where we can clearly see that the substance alcohol is what we're noticing. It's what, where our thoughts and beliefs have been formed. And these are again based on maybe society, cultural messaging. It might be based on evidence that we have, personal evidence. We're going to talk about that as well as how these beliefs get formed. So let's move on from substance to society. And society is just what it sounds like. These are these external messages that turn into beliefs. Turn into our personal beliefs about our relationship with alcohol. So we may see messaging that alcohol helps one have fun. Alcohol is necessary to go on a date. Alcohol is a stress reliever. How often do we see someone pictured in a movie or television series? They come home from a hard day at work, an event has happened, and what do? They drink. Or they say, wow, I wish I could have X, an alcoholic substance. And so we see these messages forming because they are repeated again and again and again. And frankly, the more evidence we have, the more often we see that message, the easier it is for our brain to believe it. So, another example of maybe a message from society would be moderation is possible. So, we see people that just drink occasionally. We see people that, when we go out with them, they just have one glass of wine. And so we think they're drinking moderately. And so we have this belief that moderate drinking is possible. So there's lots of ways that society and alcohol get tangled up in what we believe. And this can also be even like your family of origin, sort of like your personal society. If you grew up in a family where cocktail hour was a nightly thing, you might have grown up with the belief that, oh, I can't wait till I'm 21, or I can't wait until I'm an adult because this is a fun time. If you grew up with the message that drinking was evil and, we don't want to be like great uncle so and so or grandpa so and so, then you may have a belief that alcoholism runs in your family and you better avoid it at all costs. So, this is kind of a window into looking at how these beliefs around society can get formed and some examples. And then the level of self. And so, what's really interesting about the level of self is that this is the hardest belief to question or overturn because it goes to our identity. And beliefs that are formed at the level of self, really impact us much deeper. And despite evidence to the contrary or even new experiences, we often still cling to that belief of ourself. So, an example of a alcohol and the belief at the level of self would be I need alcohol as a sexual lubricant. This is what helps me feel sexy. A couple glasses of wine is how I get in the mood. It could be that um, I'm boring without alcohol, or I have anxiety and alcohol helps me relax, and be more comfortable in my own skin. And so right away, we can see that these are deep beliefs about who we are on the inside. I'm anxious. I'm unacceptable the way that I am. I'm not naturally sensual or sexy. And so alcohol has this messaging behind it that leads us to believe that with alcohol, I can be a certain way, or I can overcome some shortcomings, and I can actually be a better version of me with alcohol. And you might have noticed that as I mentioned some of these examples, that they maybe check all three boxes. Something like alcohol is a stress reliever, or alcohol helps me relax. Like, that could be at the level of substance because alcohol is a depressant, so it slows down cognitive function. It actually impairs our cognitive ability, our motor function. So certainly it feels a little bit things are moving more in slow motion, and that might be your version of relaxed. Then we could see from society, like, oh, we see a lot of cultural messaging that alcohol is used to help people relax. Again, from movies, from TVs, you can read it in a book, you can witness it in a bar, people walking in and saying, "Whew, I'm ready to relax." And then pour me a drink. And so that also can be part of this explanation. And then I need alcohol to relax can be tied up at the level of self around something like I'm an anxious person, or I don't easily relax, or people think I'm too uptight, or in my case I'm too much energy, too much enthusiasm. I need to calm down. Those are some ways that we see these examples can sort of overlap. But again, it's really powerful to start to explore. So if you are at a place where you can pause this podcast at this moment, or in the future, if you're driving or out for a run, I want to invite you now to take pen to paper and actually write down some of your beliefs. For me, it looked like I'm going to be miserable if I stop drinking. I'm going to be boring. People around me are going to be boring. Like when I'm not drinking, I find other people boring. So that was a belief that my life will be boring. My belief was that I would be embarrassed to tell people that I wasn't drinking. I had a belief that my husband and I, that our relationship would be challenged if I stopped drinking. Like, how are we going to connect? I had a belief that I would lose friends and I might be friendless without drinking. So there was a lot of beliefs, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There were so many, that I was too much, and so alcohol helped me calm down. I was uncomfortable in my own skin, and so alcohol helped me be more relaxed. These were deep-seated beliefs. And I recently had a conversation where I asked people these very questions. And so some of their responses were, I'm afraid if I tell people I'm not drinking, they'll judge me. So there's a belief people will judge me if I don't drink. Perhaps they'll think I have a problem. There was the belief that I'm not interesting without alcohol, or I'm more interesting with alcohol. So that is a belief that I hear a lot. I don't drink as much as other people, therefore I don't have a problem. That's one that comes up a lot. Also, on the coaching call that I was on, a couple of people mentioned this idea that I can just have one. And I've also heard the thought or belief or myth that I can start again tomorrow. So if I drink tonight, I'll just start again tomorrow. So these are fascinating things to explore. So write down your own beliefs. And then after you've written them down, I want you to go back to those 4, 6, 10 items and ask yourself, is this the level of substance, society, or self? And once you identify that, I want you to kind of highlight those ones that are at the level of self, because these are the ones that we're really going to need to explore in order to understand, is this true for me? Or is this just a belief or a myth I picked up along the way? So once you've done that, welcome back. If you took a break to do that, I want to talk about how beliefs get formed, because this is an important part of understanding how we change or question what's really happening. So, first, the truth versus the story. Our perception is a big part of this. So, we have our perception kind of at these two levels. We have our lived experience, and then we have that social proof. So, I invite you to recall that our brain is wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So, any past experience or even a story about an experience can create resistance as our brain tries to protect us in the future. So, for example, if you went to an event and you tried to get through without drinking and you were miserable, you have this lived experience where your brain says, that was uncomfortable. Don't do that again. It's probably going to go the same way the next time. Any event without drinking is going to be uncomfortable, boring, dull. And so we create this belief that we feel like there's evidence to support it. But sometimes what's happening is it's just our own story, and we're relying on that story as if it's fact. So that's one way. And then also, our perception can be tied to this social proof. So we create meaning from the evidence that we gather. And this can include our family of origin or messages we receive from society. So again, this kind of goes to those beliefs that get formed around the level of society, where we see a lot of things happening. And so we just pick up on that. People will say that doctors recommend, a glass of wine a night can be healthy, can be heart protective. Or we see in the blue zones that many of these elderly populations, these populations where many of their individuals live to be centenarians, we want to say, well, it must be the wine. It must be the fact that they have a little bit of alcohol each day. And so these social proofs, without any evidence, personal evidence, we can actually start to believe these experiences of other people. We can start to believe what we hear. So that's one way that these beliefs can get formed. And then something else that's really interesting, if we see the rational emotional behavioral therapy is a body of psychological, sociological work. And there's this ABC model. And so remember, this is rational emotive behavioral therapy. So we look at this ABC, and when we think about how beliefs are formed, I find this very helpful. So A is the activating agent that triggers the thought. Now, in this model, they say the negative thought, but I would say it could trigger a positive or negative thought. So, for example, one of the first times I drank, I got really, really sick, and so I could say that, oh, every time I drink alcohol, I throw up. And so then the false or irrational belief that is formed following the activating event, I could say that I need to control my drinking so I don't vomit. I need to practice drinking so that I drink just the right amount to get to that sweet spot before I throw up. Isn't that interesting? That's exactly what my brain did. And then C is the consequence that flows from that irrational thought. So now what I do is I monitor, and I spend a lot of my brain power monitoring how much my drinking is impacting me. So I don't get to the place where I'm ill. I get instead to what I consider that sweet spot of where I feel good, but not too good. And that's one example of where a belief might come from. Let me give you another example. So let's take the example of the gentleman that shared, I am more interesting when I drink. So let's say he has an activating event. He goes to a social networking event for his job and has a couple of beers, a cocktail, and then he feels like, wow, I'm really grooving here. I'm making connections. People find me funny. People are really listening to what I have to say. And from that activating event, the false or irrational belief that is formed is that alcohol is responsible for that. Now, you notice he didn't say, I'm an interesting person. I have a lot of fascinating things to offer in these situations. I'm a people person. No, his belief is that the alcohol led him to be more interesting. So the consequence that follows the C is that irrational thought that every time I go to an event or I'm around people in a social setting, alcohol will make me more interesting. Therefore, I drink. So that ABC from that rational emotive behavioral therapy model, A is the activating event that triggers the thought. B is the false or irrational belief that is formed following the event. And then C is the consequence that flows from that thought. So it's very easy to see how these beliefs are formed. And it doesn't even have to be time after time after time. Like we can have one activating event where we do karaoke without drinking and it's super uncomfortable. And then we do karaoke and we have a few drinks and we're like, oh, this is so much more fun. I'm going to drink to make sure I have the maximum amount of fun when it comes to going out with friends or singing karaoke. And so we don't have to do it again and again and again, but our brain just creates that story or belief even around one event. So, this is a really powerful understanding, at least for me, this framework of why it can seem so easy to adopt these beliefs, even without a lot of evidence, or perhaps even with no personal evidence. Oh, my friend said that her doctor told her if you want to relax in the evenings, just have a glass of wine. It's so much better than an antidepressant. So she shares that with me, and perhaps I say, wow, my doctor was talking to me about antidepressants. Maybe I should just drink more wine. So we can create a belief from an event that didn't even involve us personally. So this is why it's tricky and why we really need to start to question, where do these beliefs come from? What am I making it mean? Is this true or the story? So let's move on to actually answering these questions, right? So the next idea is really to question everything. So the Socratic questioning involves asking ourselves a series of focused, open ended questions that encourage us to reflect on our thoughts. So here's some examples. Number one, what is the evidence for this thought? Two, could I be making any assumptions here? And three, is this thought based on an emotional reaction or evidence in front of me? So I had a gentleman who is afraid to fly. He was going to be going on his first trip, alcohol free, and he was very worried because in the past he had always used alcohol as a way of sort of self-medicating and calming down. And so his belief was he had many layers of belief. So it was that alcohol would help him relax, that he would be terrified to fly without alcohol, that alcohol was responsible for him being able to fly in the past, that he would need alcohol in order to feel safe on a plane. And so we talked this through, and through the Socratic questioning, he discovered some really interesting things. So, first of all, what is the evidence for this thought? And he had lots of evidence because he'd been on lots of flights where he drank and he made it through the trip. Now, when I asked him when was the last time he flew without alcohol, it was a long, long time ago, before he was even of drinking age. And so he really has no evidence of what it's like to fly without alcohol. So I asked him, is it possible it might be easier? Is it possible you might feel more relaxed once you get strapped in your seat because you don't have the excess cortisol and adrenaline that comes when we drink alcohol? Is it possible that you will feel better and be more present and more calm and able to support yourself and, self-medicate by taking care of yourself in a healthy way? And he agreed that, I haven't tried it that way for a long time. Perhaps it is not exactly true that it's all the alcohol that's making all the difference. So, could I be making any assumptions here? Yeah, there were a lot of assumptions, right? And then, is this thought based on an emotional reaction or evidence in front of me? So, he's really afraid of flying. So, that is a fear based emotional reaction versus, planes crash left and right every day. The reality is that it's much safer to fly than almost any other mode of transportation. And so, while we sometimes have a fear of flying, it's not statistically dangerous. And so it's this emotional reaction of fear. And that also, if we were to look at his level of belief and stories around that, we might be able to poke some holes in that. And he can actually overcome not just the alcohol part, but actually the fear of flying. And so questioning everything is a big part of this. So if you wrote down those beliefs, I want to invite you now to go back and to do that ABC. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? What was the activating event? What is the irrational belief that formed based on this event? One event, usually. And what now is my behavior? What is the consequence of having and holding on to this belief? And then you can start to question everything. What is the evidence for this thought? Could I be making any assumptions here? Is this thought based on an emotional reaction or actual evidence in front of me? And so, what's so powerful about this is that we actually can see where these thoughts about alcohol, these beliefs, these myths, if you will, might be holding us back from moving into the beautiful opportunity to explore life with less alcohol or no alcohol. So, if you find that there's stories and beliefs that you hold about alcohol, I want to invite you to go through this 3-step process. Bring some awareness to what are the thoughts, ask where the thoughts came from, and question everything. Well, I hope this was helpful today. I had a lot of fun putting this together for you. I think it's really powerful to go deep and to allow that there's another way to take a look at this. Please let me know in your reviews if you enjoyed this episode. Reach out to me through Terry at thesobernutritionist.com. Let me know your beliefs and what you've learned today. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week. I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.